Seven on Sundays podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
And so over and over again, it was the slow progression of, if I did what he wanted, I could get that feeling of being special. He would not give me up for somebody else. And so that went on for a couple of months. And so when I moved in with him, it opened the door to a whole bunch of other things.
Hello and welcome to Seven on Sundays, the podcast about how young adults are navigating sex, relationships, and life today.
We are your hosts, Dr. Shez Levy and Stephanie Boy, and each week we will share our candid conversations with young adults and experts about today's tough topics.
Hello to all of our Seven on Sunday listeners. Before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to share a little bit about who we are talking to, about our guest. We are talking to Linsey, and I met Linsey a few years back on a panel discussion that we were bringing awareness to sex trafficking. Linsey herself is a survivor of trafficking, and from the moment I heard her story, I was sort of struck by, one, her resilience, but also the deceptive kind of subtlety of the grooming that she experienced and the subsequent kind of bold asks of her trafficker. And I also think her story is incredibly relatable.
Definitely. I feel like it's relatable because at the root of her story is these feelings of feeling unloved and unworthy. And I can't tell you how many people say to me, I just don't feel worthy, I don't feel enough, all those things. Her feelings in that vein led her down a very traumatic and really surprising path. So I hope you guys find, her story relatable in a lot of those ways on the deeper level, and also feel inspired by her commitment to forgiveness. She forgave her abuser, her family, and most importantly, she's forgiving herself. So if you can relate to this story, please know you are definitely not alone.
Let's jump in and talk to Linsey. Linsey, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome, and we are excited to jump in and hear a little bit about your story. As a background, actually, I'm just going to let you tell your story. We know, and I just want to advise our listening audience that this is about trafficking, and it may not be suitable for all audiences.
Well, Stephanie and Dr. Shez, thanks for having me on. I appreciate you guys taking the time to really focus in on such a touchy subject. So like they said, my name is Linsey, and I was trafficked for 7 years by my former ex-husband. And the time that I met this gentleman, I was just about 18. I had just recently moved out of my parents' home, and a little bit of backstory on kind of my family life. I grew up in a large family in a small town, and kind of everybody knew everybody. You couldn't leave your front door without somebody knowing where you were 5 minutes later. And so really heavily community-based life I had. And so when I turned 18 and I moved out, I moved right into like kind of the big city. I jumped right into a whole life that I had no idea about, clubbing and partying. Our biggest party that we had when I grew up was going out to a cornfield with a whole bunch of kids. So to go from that kind of life to the city, I was kind of starstruck. And when I met my ex-trafficker, ex-husband, it was at a club. And like I said, I was 18 and he was 11 years older than I was. And I really didn't know at the time. I just wanted to be out. I wanted to be having fun. I wanted to kind of kick off any life of being that small town girl. And so when I met him, he spent the entire night feeding me drinks and really cheesy pickup lines that, when I look back on it now, were probably really big red flags. And the first night I met him was the first night that I was with him. And when he invited me to leave and go with him, I had a couple of friends that were kind of questioning it. You don't really know this guy. But it was the first time that I had been seen, and it made me feel important.
Can I ask you a question? Did you move to the big city for a job, or what was your reasoning for moving to a city?
So when I was 17, I got involved with a community arts program. And so I had been doing theater down there and made some friends. And when I had made friends down there, I had actually left like 5 days after I turned 18, because although we were a close-knit community, I did not have a very good relationship with my family. And so as soon as I was able to get out, I got out. And
okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, and that is where I had connections, and I didn't want to be connected with anything in that town anymore. So
And
I kind of couch surfed a little bit and spent time at other people's houses. So it's not like I moved out and found an apartment and I was, living the life of Riley. It was like I just wanted to be anywhere other than where I had grown up.
okay, gotcha. That's helpful. So
Yeah.
you were still kind of financially dependent, or not really living on your own?
I was living on my own and financially independent. I would get little jobs here or there. It was enough
Okay.
to buy a couple of burgers and get gas to go somewhere. But it really was just trying to be on my own. And I didn't really know what that meant, other than I did not have to answer to my parents.
Right. Okay, gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where, having been so long, you put some of those things away into a box.
Mhm.
And so thinking back on it, it's the difference between being 18 and being a mom, because I'm a mom now. So my 18-year-old self is a little bit different. So yeah, I just kind of was bouncing around from wherever I could stay to finding this guy at a club. And he had a house and he had a car and he had a job. And he told me I was pretty. And he told me all the things that I hadn't heard from anybody else. And it made me feel good. It made me feel important. And so when my friends were questioning and saying, should you go with this guy? At that point, that guy had everything to offer that I hadn't had from anywhere else. And so I left with him that night and I went to his house. And the first introduction that I had was that he wanted to have sex. And I would have to say, within 5 minutes of getting into his door and taking my coat off, he already had the television on and he had turned on pornography. And that was kind of like there aren't really any words, because it's this feeling of like, well, now I'm at his house. I have no car. I have no way to get home. I didn't have a cell phone. And I guess this is kind of what we're going to do. And so that was that first introduction that I had with him. Fast forward to the next morning, he brought me back and I was staying at a friend's house. And when we got back there, I thought, oh, well, this is the beginning of a relationship. And so in my mind, I'm thinking that there was something more than there was. And ultimately, he called me a day later and told me he was going to try and work it out with his ex-girlfriend. And I was devastated for multiple reasons. One, because of what I had done that night, what I had exposed myself to, but also I was losing this person who had told me all these wonderful things. And I thought I had done something wrong. I hadn't pleased him the way that I should have. I hadn't done the right thing. I hadn't said the right thing. And so for a while, It was a month or two. And then all of a sudden I got another call from him, and he asked me if I wanted to hang out again. And it was almost like a repeat of that first night that I had met him. But I thought, well, this is what he wants, so that he'll keep me around. And so over and over again, it was the slow progression of, if I did what he wanted, I could get that feeling of being special. He would not give me up for somebody else. And so that went on for a couple of months until I ended up moving in with him, because I had nowhere else to go and he offered it. And so when I moved in with him, it opened the door to a whole bunch of other things.
Do you believe now, looking back, that the ex-girlfriend story was a manipulative tactic, or do you believe that that was truth, or do you not know?
So I know that she was real.
Okay.
And unfortunately, the way I found out was he had a whole bag of remembrances, I will call it, of pictures that he had kept of her doing something very similar to what he had done with me. And I didn't find that until I was actually married to him. So I learned, actually kept prizes from each different episode or each person that he had been with. And so he had a whole bag full of things with her. And when I asked him about it, he just said, oh, that's just part of it. I just keep it in case, I want to use it. Or, I never really understood why he had, but so I did know that she was real, and he had an ex-wife, and he had kept prizes from her as well. So for me, looking back on it now, it was very clear that he had then, when I met him, a horrible addiction to porn that caused the progression of what we were in.
Right. And an addiction to these types of relationships where he is grooming and controlling and leading down a path that you might not have been, pretty much weren't aware of, but these other women as well. So I imagine finding that was a big, big day for you.
It was an interesting day. I think more than finding it that there were other women was what the content was. I mean, I was still very young. The idea of some of what these pictures were, or some of the videos that he had, it was more shocking the things that were on it and in it than actually finding it.
Right.
It would be the equivalency of our kids inappropriately or unknowingly typing something into the internet and other things pop up.
Right.
And so what that does to our brain. So basically, from when I moved in with him, and finding kind of, we'll say, what he was into, at that point, I was so far into it emotionally that it didn't bother me. It should have, but it didn't, only because that desire to have somebody care about me overwrought everything else. It just was, it was a need at that point. And so when he introduced swinging, I really didn't even blink an eye. I could remember exactly where I was, how he introduced it. It was the first time I was able to drive his vehicle. And it was like a reward that I was able to drive his car, that he introduced wanting to do swinging. And so I correlated prize with appeasing him. And that's kind of how it continued throughout the beginning of the relationship. And for people who don't know what swinging is, it's an open relationship. But for my situation, it actually wasn't. He had just used that terminology to open the possibilities of me being with other people for his pleasure. So we started to go to different parties where I was under the impression that it was something that a couple did. It was only me. And then it started to be pictures that were being taken. And the pictures that were being taken, he would then post online to trade for other people to give him pictures or to get money for. And I didn't find that part out until years into the marriage. So this all took place during the time that I was 19 years old. I would have a regular life during the day. And during the nighttime, we would go out and do these things. I really was not working a steady job. I had like a couple of full-time jobs, but that didn't work out. So then he introduced stripping. And so I thought, well, I guess if I'm already doing these things with him, this will just make him even more happy. So I started stripping in a club downtown, and he would come and bring friends. And, the more that I was able to, I will say, please him in that way, the more I didn't have a desire to do it, but that I didn't want to make him angry, because there had been times where I would kind of question, based upon how I had been raised, well, is this right? I would bring up parts of my faith and be like, this does not just seem biblically correct. And he would twist it and turn it around, or he would get angry. We had a couple of times where he had been physically violent with me. And so if I had to choose between doing the things that were going to keep the peace and doing something that was going to make him angry, I was going to keep the peace. So going into being 20, at that point, we had gotten married, and it wasn't anything big or fancy. And I got pregnant with my first daughter. And even though I was pregnant, it didn't stop anything. Even though we were married, it didn't change anything. And it just was cyclical and just kept getting more secretive. Everything was very secretive. So I would go for holiday events, and at this point, I'm still a kid. 19, 20 years old, we're still kids. We're still trying to figure it out. And at this point, he is, in his mid 30s. And nobody in my family really questioned it. I would show up, and, I found out years later that while we were at a Christmas event, he was on my parents' computer looking at porn. And, we went back, and they'd asked him questions and he denied it. And so it's just this whole secret world that I was living in, trying to balance pretending like I was newly married, all while being trafficked and exploited behind closed doors.
First of all, I think we're at a place maybe where we can unpack some of the stuff. First, I want to say thank you so much for sharing this story, because it's so heartbreaking to me. And maybe some of the things that I sort of picked up on, I'd like to address, because it's something that I hear a lot, and I think it's important, which is, you said that you wanted to leave the small town and go to the big city, right? And I get that. I get that desire. But I think that there was something even more important, which was it sounds like invisibility in your family. And I feel like that probably drove that desire more than anything. And I'm just wondering how did you feel in your family? Like when you sit back and you go like, what was the messaging you got, whether it was explicit or implicit? What was the messaging you got from your family? And I guess more importantly, your parents or caregivers.
And here's one reason why I find it so interesting, because when you describe the small town, it sounds idyllic. It sounds like, like family values and we're a community and all that kind of stuff. So it creates a little bit of like, oh, but wait, that wasn't what it sounds like. So yeah, I love hearing, or definitely want to hear what that was like.
Yeah. So in the town that I grew up in, I had all of my family. So on this lake where my grandmother lived, I had all my cousins. I could go 2 cabins up and was my great aunt. I could go 1.5 mile down the road and it was my other cousins. So my whole family was there. My older sister was the prom queen, homecoming queen, winter queen, dating the high school football captain. Like she had this ideal life. And when we would go places, it was like one of those really bad movies where like, this is our oldest daughter and she's so wonderful. And this is her sister. And that's kind of how it was.
So did you get that your parents said that, obviously. Did they also give you more explicit sort of ideas that you didn't measure up, that you didn't, or was it more like a feeling that you took away from the way other people responded to your sister?
Oh, no.
I say this very, and I want to say the reason I'm saying this, because we have parents listening and we have kids listening. And what I hear is the stories of people whose family, despite whether they were the most beautiful or whatever, when those children grow up seeing their value and having someone that had their back, that looked out for them, the impact is the greatest immunity to this type of, or any sort of abusive behavior. And I think it's important for parents to hear this, because they have the power, regardless of whether their child is beautiful, is the prom queen, is the this, or their child is struggling to find their place in the world. If the messaging that you give, your child is seeing themselves through your eyes. So did your parents give you that explicit messaging and implicit messaging, or was it more like something you read from the way people responded to your sister and responded to you?
No, and I love that you bring that up, because I say all the time, the words are power. And the words that were spoken to me as a very young child changed as I became an adolescent, because as an adolescent, and I was just trying to figure things out, I was much more defiant. And so I was told, like, listen, you are the problem. You are doing this. And so because you did this, it causes us to do this. When really all I was trying to do is get them to pay attention. When you run away and you just want to be found, and when they come and find you, the first thing is chastising you instead of, oh my gosh, you're safe, you're okay. It was more seen as, you're an embarrassment. And I was told, like, what are the people going to say in this town when they find out? And so those words had a lot of power. I was very young when I lost my virginity. And the boy that I had done that with actually called my parents without talking to me, told my parents, and instead of them coming to me and talking with me, my mom cornered me, asked me about it, and then called me a whore. And so at a certain point, I just decided I was going to be the thing that they said that I was. Because then, without question, we already know this about Linsey. So, I just kind of fit into that mold of what they were saying I was. And looking back on it now, I do realize, you've got 5 kids that are still very young, and some parents are doing the best that they can with what they know. But once you know, and once you find out, it's hard, but we have to humble ourselves as parents and go, listen, I totally screwed up, and I'm sorry that this happened. I'm sorry that I did this to you. But during that time, I didn't get any of that. So when I left, nobody came looking for me anymore. I was 18, so they didn't have to. And that spoke volumes to me as well, because if nobody's going to come and look for me, who really cares? And that's truly what I believed. So I was going to find it somewhere where somebody cared at some level.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, because the kind of root of all these things is really important to understand. And the power in those words and that experience. I did wonder how old you were when you had your first sexual experience with this boy, and your mother calling you a whore and not being supportive of something that was really difficult, because I don't know how old you were, but you were young. And the running away thing. So you were searching. So it sounds like you ran away more than just going to the big city, but searching for that validation and searching for something outside of self, which is another kind of red flag to things, that for parents to know that, like, it's right here, the validation, but often we search outside because we're not getting it right here.
Right.
And those are like clue in, clue in, clue in of how essential that is, because it just continues a pattern of let me search outside, let me search outside.
Yeah. Oh, very, very much so.
Linsey, I just wonder, because you aren't the only kid that this happens to. And there's so many parents out there who are. And I love the fact that you give grace to your parents. Like, you're like, I understand they have 5 children. And I was the one who was more problematic. Okay, fine. Great. You're taking responsibility. But I think it is hard because so many parents are working a lot of jobs or trying to struggle to like get everything. And I understand when there's one child who has more issues, it's easy to become frustrated when everything else in your life is frustrating. But like, do you think it would have gone a long way for your mother or your father to sit down with you and be like, I see you're hurting. I see you question, or you don't feel like you are worthy of my love and my attention. And I'm sorry. And like, even just, I feel like the honesty of saying, sometimes life is overwhelming, and I don't want you to think that that means that I want you to fall through the cracks. If you need, like, let's come up with a word or some way that you can show me that I need to give you more, you need more, like, or whatever. Like, I feel like that is an easy conversation for parents to have. And I feel like if I'm a kid, I feel seen. I feel like you are recognizing, because there's a book by Oprah and a doctor, I can't remember what his name is, but it's What Happened to You. And I feel like they're the questions that we need to be saying to our kids. Like, no kid wants to be the worst kid in the family. Nobody wants that. Like, that literally doesn't make any person happy.
Right.
But they need to be seen. They need to feel like somebody has their back. Somebody cares, and somebody believes that they're capable of better than what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as a family therapist, I can say that every family has kind of the scapegoat, loud voiced person that really points to the family dysfunction. It's never about that individual. It's why I became a family therapist, because I was like, it's not about this. It's not about that person. That person is the barometer for where the emotional, status is in the family. And that person is kind of showing the dysfunction. And unfortunately, they get targeted as the scapegoat, but it's not about them. It's about the whole dynamic. I wonder, did you ever have that moment with your mom or parents or anyone in your family about kind of what you did experience, and then kind of saying, wow, yeah, I get it. That was not right. Did you ever have that?
So that would be the whole reason that I wrote my book.
Okay.
The two paralleling, one is forgiving my trafficker and the other was forgiving my parents, because to this day, there is no acknowledgement. There still is that battle of, you did this to yourself. And so, Stephanie, you were saying how we talk to our kids, having that word. If at any point somebody had just said, it's okay, you're a kid, you're going to make mistakes, something as simple as that, or just acknowledging that you are a kid, you don't know it because you don't know it, that would have made all the difference. I wasn't looking for all the answers. I just was looking for somebody to see me for who I was. It wasn't anything extravagant. I was not the typical kid. I mean, I played football. I was the only girl on a team who played football because I wanted to be seen. It wasn't because I was trying to make a statement. I just wanted to be noticed. And it sometimes is as simple as put our phone down, or close our work computer, take time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something where all technology is off and you can look your kid in the eye and just let them know, or let them see that they're being seen and what they have to say is important. I think that would have changed so much. Would have changed all of it? Maybe not. But it probably would have given me a little bit more of a feeling of like, I don't have to do these things, that I have value, that I don't have to go seek it out somewhere else, and that it's a process. But, it's the simple things. I think we overcomplicate parenting where, it's really just these tiny little humans that are trying to figure it all out.
And I think it's important that parents acknowledge we also fuck up. We also can't do all that we're supposed to do. I mean, I don't know how many times I've said that to my kids. Like, I'm trying my hardest, but like, I have literally used every tool in my toolbox. I have nothing left. Like, please tell me how I can do this better. Like, tell me what I can do. Cause I feel like I'm doing the best I can. And sometimes it is just them saying like, I just want you to not answer the phone when we're in the car. I just want to have conversations without it being interrupted, and you're like, that's like so easy. That's not a tool in my toolbox. That is literally going back to basics.
Why that happens though, is we're all wounded soldiers walking around with our traumas, big T, little t. Like we're all kind of navigating life with our unhealed parts and our healed parts. And so the ratio of the healed to the unhealed is how present you can be. And that's where being conscious and doing things like writing this book and turning your whole life around, which is amazing, Linsey, like so amazing that number one, you got out of this situation as a young person. I don't know how old you were when you got out of it, and turning it around to write a book about forgiveness and all these things that you're saying is so admirable. But that's the ratio of healed to unhealed. And when we really look at what am I still getting triggered that's unhealed, no matter what age you are, that's where we awaken to, okay, I've still got some work to do. And every single person has that. I don't care if it's Oprah, sorry, Oprah, but I mean, we've all got it, no matter how much work we've done. So that's interesting to me. I'm curious, did your parents read your book? Have you given it to them?
No, we have, it's a bit strained only because I think, and this is to talk to the parents that are out there. I think that they have not actually ever healed from knowing what had happened. I can recall the night that I told them everything and I just laid it all out there for them and they didn't have a whole lot to say. And in that moment, I was so mad. I was like, where are you? See, you're not there once again, but realizing now they were processing through it. They knew that something was happening, but what could they do? So then we blame ourselves as parents for like missing the cues instead of acknowledging that it happened and then working through it with them. Because as a victim of it, we first feel shame. That is probably the biggest reason why people don't get out of it. What are people going to say? And then as parents, if we're coming down on our kids, they're already feeling ashamed and not knowing how to process it. It's just a double whammy. And so I think it's the acknowledging that nobody sets up for something like this. Little kids do not wake up one day and say they want to do this, and parents do not raise their children most of the time to do this, to be in this life. And so it's having those graces of understanding that it can happen, but it also can be healed from. It's a long journey, but you can heal from it. And so we don't need to be ashamed if it happens. And as parents, it's okay. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay that our kids made a mistake. It's when we hold on to our pride and try and act like we've got it all together so that the world doesn't look at us differently, that changes the whole dynamic of everything. And so, that for me was the biggest thing to acknowledge. They didn't know, and they didn't know what to do even when they did know. And so that's why it's so important for me to be talking about this, because I can look at it on both sides, one as a parent, and then as being someone that this happened to. And so the more that we can talk about it, bring it into the light, I think the less difficult it will be for kids to start talking about these things that may have happened to them, big or small. You know, simple things is like sending an inappropriate picture and being caught, or being online and doing something inappropriate. It all still has the same weight of shame. We just need to start acknowledge it and then be able to move past it.
You know, I'm
Yeah.
so glad that you just brought up shame, because shame is so powerful in the negative. It is
Mhm.
me, I get very upset when I see anyone trying to shame another person. I feel like shame is literally the root of so much evil. It literally is. You can destroy another life by
Mhm.
shame on them, right? And I don't like to talk about like my own personal religious beliefs or anything like that, but there's a song and that I've recommended like to people I know that have had abortions or things happen to them and they can't get over their own shame. And if I know that they are Christian, I will always send them this story by Crowder about I can't some Come to the Table. I think it's called Come to the Table.
Oh. Mhm.
Every time I hear it, I feel the power of forgiveness and someone saying, I'm sorry, I see you and it's okay. No matter what you've done, it's okay. And I feel like in that moment, when you told your parents, it's so easy to be defensive. Oh my God, I fucked up as a parent, right? But it's not about you. It's not about you when someone tells them their story.
Mhm.
I feel like there's nothing more powerful than just saying, Linsey, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. I am so sorry that I wasn't there, that I didn't see it. I'm so
Mhm.
sorry that we had so much chaos while you were growing up, that this is where you ended up. This is nothing about being defensive about who you are. But I feel like if you can take away someone's shame, like as much as shame is an anchor that will kill people, removing someone's shame is the greatest gift of life. It's
Oh.
literally one of the greatest gifts you can give to people.
Mhm.
So
That's
if
so
you think
beautiful.
about like, oh, I fucked up, don't think about yourself in those moments. Think
Right.
about how can you take the shame that this person feels, because no matter what, whether it was your fault or not, it doesn't matter. But what you need to do is remove any shame, because no person lives up to their God-given purpose when they are sitting under a fucking weight of shame. It's the
Oh,
worst
it's
thing
like,
in the world.
it's an anchor
So,
that will drown you.
It will drown you.
yeah. I love the saying, and I find myself saying it so often. I don't know who to attribute it to, but that we're only as sick as our secrets.
Oh,
And
that's so good.
shame thrives in secrecy. Like that's what it's all about. And so the mindset, I'm totally with you both that somebody coming clean and being able to step outside of themselves and say, I'm sorry, is such a gift. Like that does help kind of chip away at the shame. But we don't always get that opportunity, unfortunately, and people are not there and we can't get them there. But relieving our own shame by coming out of the dark, coming out into the open, honest willingness to almost face it head on and be like, I had this and not, I had this and I'm so shameful, but I had this and here's where I am today. Or I did this and here's where I am today. And what you're doing, the full circle that I see with you, which is so admirable, is, really taking the courage to do that, because most people, never mind write a book about it, most people hold that in for years. I see women that hold in anything shameful, sexual abuse, all kinds of things until their 50s, 60s, 70s, and don't ever tell anyone, their loving husband or their mother or whoever. So the fact that you're head on facing whatever might have been shaming. And here's the other important thing: traffickers and abusers and sexual offenders use shame as a manipulation tool. So it is told, oh, you better not tell this or everyone will hate you or everyone won't believe you, or so it's also so conflicted in the mind. This is such a mind game. It's the body as well, but it is such a mind F up, really, that to override that is incredibly tough. And to override all those messages, societal and from the person, is huge. But I want to say about forgiveness that it is so wonderful if we get it from the other person. But from what I hear in this very room is that 90% of people don't get that, maybe 99. Nope. So few don't get that. So there had to have been a way for you, and I'm curious how you overrode that, how you were like, I told them the most vulnerable, shameful thing that I held on to for myself, and I still got the same response. Like, how did you override and overcome that to where you're sitting with us today, not emotional about it? That surprises me that wouldn't still bring up emotion like, oh my God, I even tried this and they're still not there, you know?
Well, the first thing I had to acknowledge is, being trafficked, you're in a prison without chains. And I lived there and I stayed there for so long because of the things that we just talked about. And overcoming first the fact that I was able to release myself from that prison was huge. So I was able to acknowledge it. So when it came to forgiveness, I was just digging a little bit deeper, realizing I was the jailer of my own jail that I was a prisoner in. And so every time I refused to forgive, I was doing it to myself, realizing I didn't need their warm feeling words that, probably would have been very empty because they're just going along with the, it's like when we tell our kids, well, you say sorry, and they say it not because they mean it, but because we're told to. I really wanted to free myself from that. I really wanted to be able to release myself from that jail of unforgiveness. And as soon as I was able to do that, I was free. It didn't matter what anybody else had to say. It didn't matter if I got the restitution. That's one of the things I talk about. Forgiveness is not restitution. It does not mean that there's going to be a give and a get. It just means that I get to give myself that gift of not being burdened with it anymore. And so that's kind of how I overcame it. And, yeah.
Because you know what?
So, and I still...
There's so much forgiveness we have to give ourselves. There's so much grace we have to offer to ourselves. And I think going back to that song is why that song really resonates with people, because it's a realization that like you are worthy just by being. You, Linsey, are worthy. Doesn't matter what you did in your past. Your past is a journey you had to go on. Your journey started very young with the messaging, the ideas you had about yourself from other people that set you on a path. It could have been stopped at any time along the way by someone intervening, a grandparent, an aunt, cousin, anyone telling you how worthy you were, but ultimately we hope that a child gets that messaging from their guardians and from their parents. But if you don't, ultimately, in the end of the day, it's the understanding that you are worthy just by being. That's it.
Exactly. And for me as a believer, it was like, how can I receive God's forgiveness if I can't give it? And so, that's a big thing I try and teach my kids now is, you want to be forgiven for certain things, but you're not willing to forgive other people.
Yeah.
So, it's a give and get. If you want to be able to not have to carry that around with you, because it is so much baggage. And then heavy. It's almost, you got to have upkeep on it. You talk to them and then you're going to unpack all that stuff. And then you're done with the phone call with them. And then you repack all that stuff and you just carry it with you everywhere you go. And so now, thankfully I don't have to talk to or see my trafficker anymore, which had been a problem for a while. But with my parents, my kids still want to talk to them and I still let them, and I let them know that is your relationship. And, wherever they are at with it and wherever I am with my parents, I still love them. I still acknowledge that I got life from them, good, bad, indifferent. I would not be here without them. And so sometimes it's just the little things of being able to say, thanks for just feeding me. Thanks for giving me life. Thank you for a house. All the other stuff.
Gratitude will start to melt your heart and to, just the
Mhm.
smallest offerings of gratitude for those little things. I love that.
Like for me, the fact that I'm still alive is a huge thing. That my trafficker did not kill me, that I did not walk away with any illnesses. There are a lot of girls that come out of it that have some sort of an illness or an addiction. Like I did not have any of that. I think if I would have been on the streets, it would have been a lot different. So there's all these tiny little things where I can go, well, it could have been worse. And so I'm just going to be thankful for that.
They're little like miracles along the way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I have a question just in the few minutes we have remaining, if it can be in that time frame, and otherwise it might be another conversation, but because this is so helpful, Linsey. So what trafficking really mirrors is cult indoctrination. It has all those elements of being indoctrinated in a cult, and it's a very slow process, I imagine, for most people that, like you, kind of came into it very naively. So it has all those aspects. So I'm always fascinated to understand, again, how did you come to the realization of what this was, and then physically and emotionally get out of it? I know you had therapy, but did that happen before you chose to leave this, or was that an after process, or how did that work for you?
So I actually did not leave because I was being trafficked. I left for my kids.
Okay.
I had 2 kids, and I had to look at them and realize that I was going to have to acknowledge this to them one day. And I'd love to talk more with you guys about it, because that in itself was a journey just to get out, because it took 7 additional years after I left to realize that I had been trafficked. It took a journey around the world for my brother to be able to come back in a third world country and say, hey, this happened to you. So it was a very long process for me. And when I did therapy, it wasn't really ever to help me, it was to help my kids. I did a lot of processing through on my own. I sewed a lot, but also I spoke a lot. I think the more that I started speaking about it, the freer I was. That, for me, more than anything that I did, was the healing process, because I took my voice back. The first time I ever spoke before a group, I was terrified. I had no idea what I was going to say. And then it just all started coming out. And at the end of it, people were like, oh, that's so great. And I was like, I don't even remember what I said, because I just needed to get it out. And the more I spoke about it, the places that I've been able to share this with other people has allowed me to be free of that weight. And I think when we get our voice back, when we're able to share what has happened to us, the people that hurt us don't have that control anymore. The longer that we hold on to it, they still have that control. And so that was when I was able to take my life back.
I have to say,
Yeah,
100%. I know Dr. Shez is going to agree. 100%. From the time I was little, I told the story of what happened to me. And even though it got shared around my 7th grade class, I was sexually assaulted when I was in 8th grade through a Kung Fu teacher. I mean, not 8th grade, 8 years old, with a Kung Fu teacher. And the story got told. And at first I was horrified, because you're like, oh my God, I feel so exposed. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're like, people will come up to you. And the second that one person comes up to you and says to you, that happened to me, it's the moment that you forgive yourself, because you're able to see yourself in someone else's eyes and go, I can forgive that person. It's almost like when your child becomes the age that you were when something happened to you, there's another healing that happens, because you go, oh my God, 8 years old. Oh my God, 18 years old. How could I ever make a good decision at 18? How could I ever have said no to an adult when I was 8 years old? You begin to forgive yourself all over again.
Yeah. And
that's so powerful.
We don't realize
that's a message, a call to action for if people hear somebody and they relate in any way, it's not just for their own processing and healing, but man, that can make a difference. Just you saying that gives me chills, because that one person can make a difference to say, okay, this was really hard, but wow, look, I'm helping somebody, or I see myself in somebody, all those things. So yeah, that's so big.
Yeah, no, but I always say God brought me through it so that I can use it. Because like I said, just that one person that will hear it and be able then to raise their voice. And now you then have a chorus of voices that are stepping out and saying, we're not going to stand for this anymore, or, let's protect our children, or just, like with what you guys are doing, calling out the things that need to be called out and not being afraid anymore of who's going to say what.
That is
It's
so
powerful.
big.
So
So big in all things. Like this is a big thing, but in all things, the world would be so different if we were willing to be vulnerable and willing to really share our experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Linsey, can
Thank
I
you.
ask you one thing? Because we are like getting to the end of our interview. I just want, because I think it's really important that we do address this. I think this is sort of what Dr. Shez was going to, but so what happened to you was, and what she's saying about that, this is any kind of cult mentality. It's the slow indoctrination. It's the introduction of things like, I've already pushed you to this boundary, and now I'm going to push you just a little bit further. I'm going to use shame to make sure you are silent and understand that I'm in control of the pieces here. But I think that that's really important, because I wrote down that he started out by showing you pornography and you're like, wow, okay. And then it was like, he introduced you to swinging, and it was like every little thing chipped away. Like, I'm going to let you talk about it, because you talk and you educate people. So you can tell us about that, because I think what's important is for other people to see that it's a slow process, and how it, as like one of the girls I talked to said, it literally, there was a point where her soul got broken, and then that was it. Like, so anyway, maybe you can just, how would you educate young people who might be in these types of abusive relationships?
Right. I like the analogy of the frog in the boiling water, where they're just kind of sitting there, and as the heat gets more and more, it ends up killing you. And that's kind of for me what it was. It was this, he first found what I wanted, which was to be loved and to be paid attention to. So he fed that need. And then every time he would do that, he would want a little bit more. And so, we kind of ignore, because society, Netflix, all these channels has desensitized us to thinking that a half naked lady is acceptable on just a regular television show. And so we have the world desensitizing us. And then these traffickers that are saying, well, don't you want to be like that? Look how pretty they are. And they feed into those desires that we have. And that's exactly what he did. Facebook wasn't big. A lot of the internet sites that he was on, like, no longer exist. They didn't have TikTok. And so for him, he would have to actually go and hunt out these places that he wanted to find. And then when he found what these people were wanting, he would then introduce it to me as something new and fun to do together. So it fed my desire of wanting to have him pay attention to me. It fed his desire of achieving what his goal was. And, like I said, it was a very slow progression, because we could go a couple of weeks and we would just have a regular life. And then a Friday night would pop up, and all of a sudden we're drinking a lot. And when you're drinking, your inhibitions go down. And because I was a minor, I couldn't buy it. So he was providing it. And, by the time you get to a certain point in your drinking, you really don't care anymore. And so you're not caring because you're drinking, and you just want to have that feeling that they give you, or not getting in trouble, or whatever it is. So Stephanie, what you were saying is these girls that are in this now, at any point, it's okay to say no. You are in control of you. You have that power for yourself, even though you don't feel like you do. You do. It is scary. It is hard. They're going to tell you everything that they know are your insecurities because they have taken the time to learn what those insecurities are. But you are stronger than that. You know, at that time, I didn't realize it, and I didn't have anybody telling me that.
So I have a question. What is just because I want to speak to that girl, what is the internal dialogue? Because turning up the heat in some ways, I feel like removes or discounts the fact that inside we have a dialogue that's going on that allows the heat to be raised, even if it's not, of course, there's no blame, but I think there's an internal dialogue that says, ooh, like I always say to my kids, like it's finding those words. Like when my daughter used to say to me, I don't know, it's just weird. I was like, oh, there's something deeper to weird. So like, what is the internal dialogue that you hear that makes you go, oh, I don't know, I think something's not right here, but that you discount?
It's that little voice inside of us that, you know, it's a discomfort. I can tell, I'll tell you for me what it was. It was a discomfort for me internally that was wanting to pull me away from it. But everything that he was saying wanted to pull me back. Everything physically in my head, that dopamine was going, you want that sensation. You want to have that prize. You want to be rewarded. It was this tug of war between what was inside of me, those things that had been ingrained in me, with what he had groomed for me. And so for me, it was a little different because I was a little older, but I think sometimes other people actually can come into those conversations, and it's like listening. When you have friends that are asking you questions that may not ask you those questions normally, pay attention to that, because for as much as we think we're hiding, we're not. There are signs out in the world that people can see. But when you start to feel that tug of war, just start asking yourself questions. Like, really look at what your morals are. Look at, maybe it's not what your family has raised you with, but whatever you are questioning inside of yourself, dig into that. I talk about that in my book. It's called 7 Levels Deeper. And it's not something I came up with, but you literally are asking yourself the same question over and over again. So like, why am I staying? Oh, because I have a place to live. Well, why are you staying? Well, because he makes me feel good. Why are you staying? You dig into that question. So when you are feeling that pull, keep asking yourself, because eventually you're going to come down to it. And usually it's something like this: I'm afraid.
I love that. So when you feel that push and pull, that tug of war within your own mental space, ask the question, keep asking it to get down to a deeper level. I friggin' love that. That's amazing. And I just want to say one other thing really quickly, because I know Dr. Shez has something to say, and I know we have to wrap up. But I want to say that you say like it's about your morals. And I question whether it's about morals, because to a lot of people, morals feels religious. And I think actually all of us have an inherent dignity. And I think that's what was going against. It wasn't necessarily going against your morals. It may have been, but your morals, a lot of times morals are based on our inherent human dignity. And I think that was what was, for people who are not raised religious, you still have that feeling because you are deserving of dignity and you have inherent value. So I wanted to point that out. And I also want to say one other thing is, you said he found your need. This is what makes him a trafficker. He absolutely worked on your vulnerabilities. He found your vulnerability and he exploited it. That is what traffickers do. They exploit vulnerabilities, whether that's homelessness, that's drug addiction, that's somebody who doesn't have love, because not only did you not have love, but you were always compared to your sister. So being desired sexually was also appealing to you. I have to imagine that would be the case for anybody. But he exploited your vulnerabilities. It was more than a need. It was something that was like deep. It's wound. It's your wound.
Yeah. And Stephanie, I want to add to that. Yeah, because morals are like the difference between when we are walking down the street and we see somebody hitting somebody, we know that's wrong. There's nobody that has to tell us that that is wrong.
Yes.
We know it. So when there is that thing inside of us, whether it's been verbally said or we just inherently know it, that's what I mean.
This excites me so much that I'm like, oh, so what that term is psychologically is dissonance. So
Mhm.
it's so important that people understand that dissonance is having in these situations both the attraction and the repulsion. We can have both, and it doesn't feel right. And because these manipulative factors are in place, I'm not going to say people, but factors get in place with isolation and all the other shaming and all the other factors that are manipulative. We have the attraction for whatever that might be for somebody. For you, it was being seen and loved and heard, maybe, or valued, even though it wasn't a valuing experience. But so we have the attraction and then we have the repulsion. And what we don't listen to oftentimes, or we try to numb out with that repulsion or with that inner gut feeling. And so dissonance is something really important. And you gave the tool of I call them the 5 whys, but you did 7, which is even better. That's root cause analysis. And that is so important to get to the root 5 or 7 times. Like, what am I really needing to understand here? And so asking those whys that many times gets you to the deeper. And that's a really good practice and a fabulous tool for everything. I did it at the very beginning of my book for why am I writing this book? Well, I want to help people, but why am I writing this book? Well, da, 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 da. And by the time I got to the 5th one, it was because I want to honor my brothers who passed away. I want to recognize that their life was worthy, that, one committed suicide and the other one died in another way. But I want to honor them. And that's my root pull, because I have both the shame and sadness about that. And I have the pull to I want to help the world, I want to get this out and understand it. So I love that you're doing that and that you recommend that as a tool, because that is so important for people, number one, to understand what dissonance is and feels like. And you feel it in the gut. The gut is the brain, it's on that brain axis. So we feel that there. And recognizing that and really paying attention to that on our own. You won't do it if you're in that situation, but removing yourself for a second and really saying, what is my gut telling me? Then it's usually, I would say always, right? And then getting to that root cause analysis of why am I feeling this way? Or why am I doing this? Or why am I not doing this? And really understanding those deeper dives, like you said. I love the name of your book. Tell us the name again.
So it's called Growing in My Enemies. And right now it's on,
enemies.
Yep. And right now it's on Amazon. And so you can do the print. So the order to print. So it'll print out for you. And then I want to add to that real quick. It's not just for the kids to do that. It's for the parents as well. When we're dealing with and processing through what they tell us, when they finally come and tell us, parents ask that too. Why am I mad? Why am I responding this way? Because I think there is something to be said in that as well, as you both work through it. Because I think we'll find more than anything, we're just as scared as they are.
Definitely.
Yep. A Course in Miracles says there's only love and fear. So you're going to get to the root of one. If it's the root of love, you'll be fine. It's not going to leave you with these kinds of feelings. But probably, the deepest layer of most shame, anything, is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of not being good enough, fear of not being worthy, fear of being dirty, fear of being all of those things.
Yep, it is.
I love that you brought up the Course in Miracles. My favorite theory from that is everything is either love or a call for love. I just feel like that's the root of everything. Everything is either love or a call for love. But I want to say this as a quote that you reminded me so much of when we met before. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so her. One of my favorite quotes from Carl Jung, and there are many, so this one is a big one for me, is I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And you and your choices today of what you're choosing to become is a path that the courage that it takes to do that. I just want to say thank you for doing that. And thank you for speaking to us and sharing this with as many people who are listening, because what you're choosing today and in every moment, I imagine, for all of us is a daily, courageous, brave task. So we are not what happened to us, we're what we're choosing. And thank you for your choices. All of them, all of them.
Linsey, can you tell us where anyone in our audience who wants to learn more can go to find you?
So right now, I am on lindseyruthcoaching.com.
Awesome.
And that just kind of goes a little bit over what I do. We're getting back into kind of, for a while, I was in the prisons and just teaching girls how to sew so that they had an outlet. That was what worked for me. So it doesn't work for everybody, but that's something we're working on here in Ohio, where I am right now. And then just also looking for the book on Amazon. And
give us the name one more time.
So it's Growing in My Enemies. And I have here.
Yay! That's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And Steph, I think we'll put that in the show notes. And I really want that song that I wonder if I know it, the come to the table. Let's put the song in there too.
Yes.
Can't wait to hear
that's
that.
a great idea.
There's another really good one. It's called Mended by Matthew West.
Okay.
That was only because I love sewing so much. I correlated it, but it just talks about being broken beyond belief, and that God is there. So that was just a really good one for me. So
I keep having this image, Linsey, of the sewing. The way that you are sewing your life together is such a beautiful quilt in my mind of like, wow, you've really sewn all the pieces, the knotty threads and the glorious place where I think you kind of weave into these days. But love the metaphor of sewing. What you've done is really beautiful.
I'm so excited that we did this conversation, and I'm so grateful because I think this is a great message of forgiveness. It's a great message of a tool that is one of the best tools I've heard. And it's about seeing the signs and the power of parents' words, of guardians' words, and that our children first see themselves through our eyes. So Linsey, thank you for this multi-layered, amazing interview. I really appreciate it. And I think it's going to help so many people.
Well, thank you for having me. And anytime you guys want to take on the conversation again, I would love to. Yeah.
Awesome.
For sure.
Thanks, Linsey.
For sure. Thank you, Linsey.
Take care, ladies.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Shez Levy and Stephanie Boy based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guests that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
Join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7onsundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you and be well.